and welcome to Miss Featherstone's SL History class of IB 2017. Today we will be comparing and contrasting World War I and World War II. Evidently two of the biggest total wars in history since the Earth was created in this beautiful universe.
World War I and World War II both have distinct events. However, their similarities can validate the statement of history repeating itself. The First World War broke out due to factors such as militarism, imperialism, the alliances, and the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Tensions were caused between the European powers through previous conflicts such as the Franco-Prussian War, in which France lost Alsace-Lorraine to Prussia and had to pay an indemnity to Germany, and Germany unified and established itself as a major power in Europe. The following social and economic conflicts within France, as well as the humiliation of defeat, caused for the need of revenge within France. Imperialism led to further tensions, especially between Germany and Britain, in an attempt to establish itself as a colonial power through Weltpolitik. Germany created a rivalry to Britain, as well as undermining Bismarck's web of alliances, which was established to prevent a two-front war. An example of this is Germany's telegram to the Boer leader commending him on opposing Britain, which created tensions by showing Germany's opposition and competition towards Britain. Furthermore, a series of crises between 1905 and 1913 led to the outbreak of the Great War. Germany's attempts to break up the entente between France and Britain in the Moroccan crisis not only failed and resulted in the Anglo-French Entente, but established Germany as a major threat, contributing to the conditions of war, which was only increased after the Second Moroccan crisis. The Balkan Wars, fueled by tensions established in the Bosnian crises, then set off the major tensions between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, caused by attempts to contain Serbia, and through these wars, Serbia grew stronger. Finally, these tensions were set off in the July crisis of 1914 through the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Austria-Hungary used Serbia's hesitance to sign the ultimatum as an excuse to start war with Serbia, fully backed by Germany, which brought in Serbia's ally Russia. When France refused to remain neutral, Germany was forced to go through Belgium, involving Britain as well, due to their alliance with Belgium. These series of alliances escalated the tensions and conflict to the point of total war within Europe. Within both wars, the US first practiced isolationism, but entered after a direct attack on itself. In World War I, the US joined after Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare on American ships such as the Lusitania. After the Zimmermann telegram negotiating a military alliance with Mexico, which enraged the US and triggered their entering the war. Similarly, in World War II, the US entered the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. In both wars, Germany's aggressive strategy contributed to the outbreak of the war. In World War I, it was through following Weltpolitik, and in World War II, it was through the rapid expansion and aim for Lebensraum. In World War II, Britain's appeasement to Germany contributed to the outbreak of conflict by creating tensions within Czechoslovakia, as it was put under Nazi control by a means of sacrifice, which also strengthened Germany. It also presented Germany with a lack of resistance from the other nations, adding to its power and incentive to expand. US isolationism contributed to the war because the US was no longer able to support Britain and stop Britain from appeasing Germany, leaving Britain weakened without a strong military and with its only chance to prevent conflict to appease Germany. It also contributed to the failure of the League of Nations because the creator of the League was no longer involved, so it was not enforced and the international aspect of the League was taken away, which resulted in the failure of an attempted peace in Europe, further setting up conditions for war. Furthermore, it assured Germany that there would be little to no interference from the US, eliminating them as a threat, giving Germany more incentives for aggression. Expansionism in both Germany and Japan presented threats to the surrounding nations. The Japanese attack on Manchuria created tensions in Asia, but also established Japan as a power, and as a threat to the US due to their economic interests within the area.
The causes of both wars, so let's take a look at their effects. Now, World War I ended, there was a mini economic crisis in Europe due to all the damage that had been caused and the steps that each country took to solve the problem. Unlike World War II, this instability wasn't handled well and it was hard to maintain. Revolutions broke out in Germany against the Kaiser, a civil war erupted in Russia, Austria-Hungary was no longer a major power in Europe and split into two states, and in Turkey, an authoritarian government took over from the Sultan. The US came up with the 14 points, an idea of the formation of the League of Nations. Though unlike after World War II, this didn't end successfully. All the anger that the French and British had, they couldn't agree on what the treaty should look like. They wanted revenge. So at the end, US ended up not being part of signing the treaty or part of the League of Nations. Germany was demilitarized. They had to pay back all their reparations, and the Allied troops came into the country all the way until the Rhine River. The unfair Treaty of Versailles was one of the biggest mistakes that they made and was one of the major causes of the next World War. After this war, there was also the emergence of two main ideologies, fascism and communism. An effect that's similar to both of the wars is the encouragement that was given to the colonies of European countries in Africa and Asia, and they had to fight for independence. Europe was already weakened by the end of the war, so it wouldn't have been hard to fight against them. World War II was highly more devastating than World War I, for both the winners and the losers. There had been fighting across almost all of Europe. Unlike World War I, there wasn't any significant treaty signed in the Second World War. That lesson had been learned. Nonetheless, Germany was split into occupying zones. The USSR got control over a majority of Eastern Europe. Stalin had his influence over all the satellite states, such as Poland, Hungary, and as far into Germany as East Berlin, split in half by the Berlin Wall. The end of World War II was marked by the emergence of two superpowers, the US and the USSR, who benefited from this war much better than they had in the First World War. Furthermore, it led into the Cold War between these two powerhouses. As I mentioned, in the end of World War I, fascism had emerged, while at the end of World War II, it was overtaken by liberal democracy, another growing ideology. On the other hand, communism, that had also derived from World War I, was growing stronger. The League of Nations had broke down, but the US was there to save the day, with a much more successful group, the United Nations, which is still up until this day. Powers involved. Now, there were much more countries fighting in World War II than they had been in World War I, mainly because Asia was a part of World War II. Now, in World War I, the Triple Entente consisted of Britain, France, and the USSR, later America, all of which the USSR were similar in the Allied forces. In World War II, the Allies also got help from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, China, and India, etc. The Axis powers, also known as the Triple Alliance in World War I, consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. In World War II, Austria-Hungary was no longer a major part of the powers, so it was made up of Germany, Japan, and Italy. During both wars, feminism was emerging and women were on fleek. Both wars, we saw women stepping up to the jobs that men had and pushing for their rights. Of course, with World War II coming after World War I, the number of women in jobs had been increased, as well as their chance to prove to the world what they were capable of. Although the work was only temporary, the women did not get equal wages as men, though it was more than what they did in their traditional jobs. Most women also had risks of dying due to explosive poisoning or accidents. It was said in World War I that 1 out of each 4 workers were women and, quote, if the woman had stopped working for 20 minutes, we would have lost the war, end quote. Women filled these holes in society when men went fighting, but that doesn't mean their traditional jobs were put off. Most still had mouths to feed and homes to care for. After World War I, women became more fashionable, confident, and their behaviors changed. Some jobs such as architects or jury members were open to them, and soon enough, they got one of the most notable rights of all, voting. But of course, since it was the first time that the world saw a situation of the sort, a majority of the women had to return to their traditional roles at home. World War II was not much different, except bigger and better for women. They shared some of the similar jobs as in the First War: nurses, factory and farm workers. They produced weapons and shells that were used in war, and so much more. There was also an increase in the amount of women who were encouraged to join the armed forces. Due to this taste of freedom at work that they had, the fight for equal pay and equal rights rose a lot more, especially in the West. And gradually females became more successful. Another similarity in both wars is the propaganda that was used to encourage women into working, because countries, especially in Europe, were dependent on them to fill in for the men. An interesting fact about women. In Germany during World War II, women had censored jobs around the 3 Ks: church, children, and kitchen. In German, these words start with Ks. Trümmerfrauen, or the rubble woman, got this name from carrying out one of the biggest post-war tasks: clearing the rubble on the streets in the cities. It has been said that women held Germany together during and after the war.
Under Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany was the #1 industrial power out of the European nations. It managed to create a sense of competition and threat to other nations, such as Britain, in the naval race. Germany aided Austria-Hungary in their struggle with Serbia, which contributed to the outbreak of war. Furthermore, Germany conducted the Schleifenplan as a means of war in Europe, which is an attack strategy used to eliminate the possibility of a two-front war. This was accompanied by U-boat blockades in Britain, which limited Allied resources. Their aim was to gain new territories and to gain more economic powers through colonies. In both wars, Germany was a major aggressor and contributor and had expansionistic aims, whether it was for colonies in World War I or for Lebensraum in the East in World War II. In both wars, Germany was part of the losing side, partially due to lack of resources in World War I. It sustained heavy casualties that it could not make up for, and the Allies had installed a blockade on their resources. In World War II, they also suffered heavy casualties in Operation Barbarossa, for example, and ran thin on resources and fuel. In World War II, Germany was first under the constraints of the Versailles Treaty due to the First World War. These conditions and economic problems gave conditions for the election of the National Socialist Party under Adolf Hitler. Under Hitler, Germany also followed an expansionist path and aimed to remove the constraints of the Versailles Treaty, abolish reparations, and to regain their lost territories. It had further issues with France over territory, such as in the Ruhr crisis, which reintroduced an atmosphere of conflict. Remilitarization and refusing reparations showed rebellion to the post-war peace treaties. Germany started with the invasion of Poland and then rapidly expanded across Europe through signing an armistice with France and further invasions.
U.S. economy. The U.S. joined the First World War in April 2017, and they fought in it for 19 months. They thought so highly of themselves. During World War I, industries and steel production had a dramatic decrease, while drafts for men in the army were increased. There was also a lot of money involved in making of munitions. The US had to help the Allies and the situation of post-war, which caused them to prosper and suffer in different aspects of the war. Also, not being able to find a reasonable treaty at the end of the war, the US started to become isolationists. After the war, there was a Wall Street crash in 1929, which caused the start of the Great Depression, another cause of World War II. During World War II, however, coming out of the Great Depression and a period of isolationism, the US economy was strengthened and they outproduced all the powers altogether. They took lead in the international collaboration and started more open trade, as well as expanding employment inside this country. They were also able to present instability after the war in Europe, and they didn't make the same mistakes as they had in World War I. The most significant change was coming out of this war as a superpower, not entering isolationism and not later hitting a Great Depression.
World War I saw the early usage of machine guns and explosive grenades in infantry charges in an attempt to break the stalemate. Machine guns were effective against target crowds more than rifles were. These attacks were made more effective with the invention of submachine guns, which were handheld and had a strong firepower. Artillery was especially effective on the Western Front as it was stationary and had a high explosive power. However, it was not as efficient in breaking the stalemate due to its inaccuracy. Germans introduced chemical warfare such as chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas, which could take out large amounts of soldiers. However, depending on the wind, it could backfire, and therefore it was more unreliable until the invention of gas masks. French and British tanks could fire while crossing obstacles, yet were slow, and it was difficult for the tank operators due to fumes and heat within the tanks. Both wars incorporated U-boats and naval attacks. However, in World War I, German U-boats were useful in a blockade by sinking ships with resources, and they were very difficult to detect, and merchant ships had to travel with naval ships in order to stay protected. In World War II, this was ineffective, as the British high-frequency direction finder, also known as the Huff-Duff technology, they were able to decode messages and detect the U-boats. They also both used planes. World War I saw planes in use in dogfights and for reconnaissance work. Aircrafts also dropped bombs on opposing trenches. In World War II, as technology grew more advanced, planes were used in blitzkrieg strategies through German Luftwaffen and by Britain in their RAF. Aircrafts also dropped bombs in the Battle of Britain and in Japan, using strategic bombing and area bombing tactics. In World War II, Germany used blitzkrieg strategies which involved concentrated aircraft attacks and stormtroopers on land, which was very effective in the invasion of Poland, for example, but less effective in Operation Barbarossa. It was more suited for short-term and concentrated attacks rather than long-term assaults. World War II saw the destructive and controversial use of nuclear weaponry in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, developed by the Manhattan Project, that caused for a tremendous amount of casualties and permanent radiation poisoning in the area. In both wars, soldiers experienced great hardships during the battles. In World War I, life in the trenches was very harsh, and soldiers experienced a range of injuries and illnesses. The trenches were wet after rain, there were corpses and lack of sanitation and facilities. The lice and rats also spread disease. Some conditions soldiers experienced were trench foot, caused by dampness and water in the trenches, which could also result in excruciating pain and amputation. Oftentimes, when not under attacks, soldiers would be bored and spend their time fixing trenches or resting. German soldiers during Operation Barbarossa were unprepared and not expecting the harsh, cold Russian winters due to lack of planning. Soldiers would freeze and starve with decreasing resources, severely lowering soldier morale and weakening the army as a whole.
Fighting. World War II was much bigger than World War I and was fought on a bigger global scale. Fighting took place across almost all of Europe and a majority in the Pacific. The most important locations fought in both wars was Germany, France, Belgium, Poland, Italy, Britain, and the English Channel. Unlike World War II, World War I, the fighting took place in East Europe, such as places in Austria-Hungary, Serbia, the Ottoman Empire, Balkans, Turkey, and Armenia. There was also attacks in North Africa. World War II included locations of fighting in Scandinavia on a greater scale than World War I had, as well as fighting in the Pacific Islands, such as Japan, China, Korea, the Philippines, Taiwan, Borneo, and more. Another difference in World War II was also the attack on Pearl Harbor and the invasion of Russia, two locations where fighting was not present during World War I.
Both wars saw the creation and separation of nations as well as territorial shifts. In World War II, the 1919 Treaty of Saint-Germain called for the separation of Austria-Hungary, creating two separate states, of which Austria was very small and also known as the Tadpole State. This treaty also called for the creation of Yugoslavia. Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Yugoslavia all gained independence through the Treaty of Trianon in 1920. Furthermore, the Ottoman Empire got split up by the Treaty of Sevres, and the territories got distributed amongst the winning nations. In summary, the newly created and independent nations were Finland, Austria-Hungary, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. After the Second World War, Germany was split into 4 areas occupied by France, Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union in 1945 in the Yalta Conference. In addition, new borders were determined for Poland, gaining German territories and losing territories from the east. Furthermore, World War II saw the independence of many nations in Asia through decolonization. Indonesia, Indochina, India, Burma, and Ceylon all lost their occupants and re-established independence. While nationalism was a major cause in both wars also featured racism as a drive for tensions and conditions of war. Racism is defined by Oxford as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race, based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Within both wars, propaganda was used by the government to promote nationalism and opposition to the enemy, as well as racist beliefs. In World War I, a large degree of racism was present and contributed to conflict in the Balkans. Nationalism greatly fed the sense of racism between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, which was ultimately shown through the Balkan Wars and the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian heir by Serbian nationalist group called the Black Hand. Austria-Hungary was against a strong Serbia as it was seen as a threat, and this was only increased after King Peter, who replaced his pro-Austrian predecessor. The war also featured tensions between Britain and France and Germany, that in some cases escalated to distaste between races, especially after the Franco-Prussian War and naval challenges. The tensions between France and Germany continued in World War II, as France opted to make the Treaty of Versailles increasingly harsh on the defeated Germany, and issues over territory and reparations arose. Tensions between the US and Japan, established with Japan's rapid expansion as a major power and a threat to the US in Asia, also developed to exclusion. The US banned Japanese immigration, which furthered tensions and gave the conditions of war in the Pacific. The aims of Hitler, outlined in his book Mein Kampf, were very nationalistic. The Nazi rule was totalitarian, and the nation as a whole came before anything else, as shown by their expansion, remilitarization, and rebuilding of Germany. However, Hitler also believed in superiority of the Aryan race and had anti-Semitic beliefs also outlined in his book. The Nazi regime implemented the practice of purifying Germany through sterilization of people viewed as inferior or lacking, and aimed to exclude Jews from Germany.
One had a total amount of about 38 million casualties, while World War II had a total of over 60 million. Both wars included genocides which were committed. First one being Turkey from the Armenians, and Germany on the Jews. What affects society today? Okay, there are several remaining factors that have been influenced from the two great wars in modern day. 1. Due to the Holocaust, anti-Semitic issues are still existent, especially in the Middle East. It has also affected the criticism of Israel and the conflicts in their policies today. Due to the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, both areas are now in quarantine, and there will be everlasting radiation. The people will not be able to use the land. Also, the formation of the ideology liberal democracy has been one of the most successful impacts of both wars, especially World War II.
After both world wars, and after the German division, the German people partially turned away from militarism and adopted a pacifist attitude that can still be observed today. Based off of the ideals created in the League of Nations, such as healthcare and aid for refugees, the United Nations was developed, which aims to prevent conflicts and keep peace among the modern nations. The wars also led to a shift in political beliefs. Without the world wars, there would be no European nations. Robert Schuman, Alcide de Gasperi, and Jean Monnet came up with the concept of political system to unite the European nations after the end of the Second World War.
So these are some of the issues that are still in modern day due to the effects of World War I and World War II. I hope you enjoyed this documentary as much as we enjoyed making it.
Goodbye!